Kevin, what's happening, man? Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Nick. Good to see you today. Looking forward to having a fun discussion.
I'm looking forward to as well. I think my audience is going to really enjoy your story and your journey. And I'm excited. Listen, I'm excited for every podcast that I do, but it's interesting because I'm excited for different reasons. Like sometimes I interview athletes and I'm, you know, innately curious about this one specific play that they had or this one specific game. And sometimes I interview certain founders and I'm like, oh, I'm interested to see how they built their company or kind of how they got to where they are today. Beyond my just innate curiosity, if someone's clicked on this right now and they have no idea who you are, they've never heard of you, why do you think they should stick around and listen to what you have to say?
That's a great opening question. Why are you interesting? It's a good question. And look, I'll say up front, my only claim to the world is that I'm 54 years old and I've been running really hard for a really long time. I'd say I've run harder than most people for longer than most people. And all that means is that I've done a heck of a lot in my life. And so, quick snapshot on me. As I said, I'm 54. I live in Boulder, Colorado with my wife. We just recently became empty nesters. I've got two daughters who are both away at college. I live in Boulder because I'm a very avid rock climber. In fact, that's probably the biggest part of my identity in this season of life. And I refer to myself as semi-retired, although if you followed me around, you would definitely not think I'm semi-retired because I just started a company a few months ago and working pretty hard on that. But looking back, usually when people ask that question, they're mostly referring to your career. So career-wise, I think one thing that's interesting about my career is that I've spanned both the corporate world and the startup world. So, one of my unique claim to fame is that I've been the chief marketing officer for 3 different public companies. I'm the only CMO who has rebranded 3 public companies. So my expertise is really in branding, but also I've kind of flip-flopped back and forth between working for these large public companies, but also starting my own companies. I think I've either been the founder or part of the founding team of 5 different startups. And I joke that to use a sports analogy, I've hit for the cycle. So I've had everything from, one of them went public. And I've had others that went, flamed out spectacularly and lost millions of dollars and everything in between. And so I've just done a heck of a lot and it's kind of spanned industries. I started, my career when the internet was just a new thing. So I've kind of ridden that whole wave and now we're riding a whole new wave in AI. And I guess I'll end by saying, these days I mentioned that the biggest part of my identity is probably rock climbing. I climb a heck of a lot. I want to keep going hard while I still can. But also I'm the founder and CEO of a men's healthcare company called Bolt Health that is was kind of born out of my own personal experience in the health arena.
I'm curious, what's your definition of running around and running hard, as you say? And I ask because like I like to think of myself as a hard worker and, I have a schedule and all these things. And then I read about, the Elon Musks of the world or other entrepreneurs. And it's like
next level.
It's like I'm nowhere near. I mean, obviously, right, but nowhere near their level. So I'm curious, when you say you're running hard, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so I would say that if you can't tell already, I'm a pretty passionate person, and I'm a big believer that anything worth doing is worth doing with all of your heart. And so anything I get involved in, whether it's on the personal side or the business side, I pursue it passionately. One thing that's interesting though is I'm really wired to be more of a creative type person. And so even early in my career, I noticed that I worked best when I could work in these short, really intense buckets of time. And early in my career, I didn't have any control over my time. So I was like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. I was like trying to fit into the corporate world. And I always struggled with that, even though I was delivering great results. As I gained more control, I began to be able to build like my work style around the way that I work best. And it's with a very high level of intensity, but in relatively short bursts and a lot of task switching. But when I say go hard, I just mean like I pride myself in I only do hard things. Like I was just thinking about this yesterday. Is you know, sometimes I like will think about it and I'll be like, why do I have to be in hard mode all the time? Like why can't I just put it on cruise control for a little while? After all, I'm 54 and I've had some success in my career. I'm financially free, but I'm just not wired that way because the way I find fulfillment is by tackling hard things. I find that really fulfilling to tackle hard things and then hopefully, make progress and even have some success.
What's the importance of doing hard things?
Ooh. Well, it's the only way we grow. And I think, if you're not like, it's like, I always like to use the analogy of the shark. And I'm not even sure if this analogy is true, but apparently, if sharks don't keep moving, they die. So they keep moving even when they sleep. And I think humans are the same way. Like, here's a hot take for you is like the traditional model of retirement, I think is a literal recipe for death. Like where you work until you're 55, 60, 65, and then you sort of retire and do nothing and watch cable news all day or whatever. I think that's literally a recipe for death. I think we need to keep using our body. We need to keep using our mind. And honestly, like in my opinion, ultimate fulfillment is found through the pursuit of mastery. So it doesn't matter what you're pursuing mastery in. And of course, mastery is a moving target. You never become the master. It's only the pursuit that matters. But that's the most fulfilling way to live, at least in my experience.
I think Naval had that thing where he was like, humans should work like lions. So, lions, when they hunt, they obviously, they go hunting, they exert all this energy. It's this whole big thing. And then they go in and they take a break, an extended break. And then they're back at it again, in 2 days or the next day or whatever. They're hunting again and they're exerting all this energy and then they rest.
Yeah.
And Naval said he thinks that, in his opinion, that humans are wired similarly in that manner. That when we want something, when we have a goal, when we're motivated, we work really hard at that. We exert a ton of energy, and then we rest once that goal is complete, or once we hit some milestone, and we start back up. And it's like this cyclical style of work. Where nowadays, like if you look at, you mentioned working in corporate, right? Like the standard 9 to 5, it's almost like this one just continuous motion, right? Like you're just working the same hours more or less Monday through Friday, and then the weekend comes and maybe you got chores to do, other things to do, you rest for a little bit and then you start back up. But you're not really exerting a ton of energy and then resting. You're more so just exerting perhaps maybe just the same amount of energy consistently.
Yeah.
And his opinion is that that's not beneficial to most humans.
Yeah. And so here's a little backstory on that, because I totally agree with what Naval said. And a lot of us have always have sensed this our entire careers, that is the way we work. Um, we work best. But the 9 to 5 model came out of the old industrial age, right? The factory work model, where work and output were a linear relationship, right? It's like if you're producing widgets, the more hours you work, the more widgets you can produce because it takes a certain amount of time to produce each widget. That doesn't work at all for knowledge work because knowledge work is not linear. Knowledge work happens in fits and spurts and when you're inspired. And so, yeah, like early in my career, I remember I worked for this fancy management consulting firm, and we were expected to sort of sit at our desk from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., if not longer, and sort of do work in a linear fashion. And it was torturous for me because I would, have a great idea or see an insight and then work furiously for 3, 4 hours. And frankly, I'm spent after that. In fact, my wife and I always joke that, I go so hard pretty much from the time I get up until dinner. After dinner, like I don't even have the mental capacity to watch TV or read a book. I'm freaking spent, man. And I'm usually like a vegetable on the couch and then I'm early to bed. So yeah, I think that's the way certain people are wired. And I think all founders are wired that way.
So what's the end result of all of this? Because listen, being an entrepreneur, being a founder, right? Like you are amongst a few, right? It's I forget the exact statistic. I think was it like 8% of Americans or something are entrepreneurs or small business owners, right? So along the lines of 10%. So definitely in the minority.
Yeah.
So most people, right, work a 9 to 5 or what we would call a standard job. How do you see that changing at all? Like, do you see AI disrupting that? Like, how do you see that evolving in the future?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think AI is going to change a lot of things, and it's hard to predict the outcome of that. That here's the irony. I think 10, 20 years ago, we thought that AI and robots were coming after the blue collar jobs. And that's happened a little bit, right? I mean, obviously, there's robots in factories that do repetitive work. But, robots aren't going to be touching plumbers or electricians or welders anytime soon, but they're absolutely coming after the white collar jobs. Even in the ones you would have thought would be very hard for computers to do, like design, right? Creative, movie making. I mean, that's where, and I think that's quite a surprise to everybody, and it's reshaping. And I would say, I did a deep dive into AI recently, like just dove into all the tools and used them on some projects. And I can tell you, like, as someone who's been, a CMO, chief marketing officer, most of my career, I'm used to managing large teams of individuals. I think the team size that you need these days is much smaller. I think you need a few ninjas who really understand AI and have an AI first attitude. And what used to be a team of, let's say, 30 or 40 can now be a team of 10, even 5. And so I don't know how, like, the counter to that, of course, and this is what Elon Musk would say, is that every major technology innovation that we've said throughout history was going to kill jobs ends up creating a larger job market. We just don't know what that looks like yet. Any major innovation, if you could predict exactly how it plays out, you'd be a billionaire. But historically, if history does repeat itself, every major innovation that we thought was going to shrink the job market actually expands it.
Well, as someone who, grew up during, or not grew up, but was heavily involved in kind of the internet bubble when that was starting up back in the, mid to late 90s and early 2000s. I mean, even back then, like if you go and read some of the articles and some of the things that were being said about the internet, I mean, you would have thought that the world was ending, right?
Yeah.
Like there was definitely some doomsday type content out there, similar to what we're seeing with AI now, where people are saying, hey, the internet's going to come, it's going to take everyone's job, and we're all going to be out of work in 5 years. And there's the flip side of that too, right? There were people who were more optimistic about the future and what the internet could create and what it could lead us to. So it's interesting. Like I like that point about, and that's been my point whenever I talk to my friends about AI. It's like, um, if you go back and even if you look at, when machinery was being invented, right? You had the farmers and everyone were, they're up in arms because, oh,
Right.
well, what are we going to do now? Or, we're going to run out of work. And then you had the factories and you had, even automation within factories, and all the factory workers were like, well, what are we going to do now? Like, we're not going to have any work. And lo and behold, like we've figured it out and we've found a way through all that. So
Well,
there
there's
is
so many examples, right? It's like TV is going to kill radio.
right.
Online music's going to kill the music industry. Like it's one after another. And of course, what ends up happening long term is all those markets only expand. So yeah, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, what is amazing is, like, most people don't realize. I think they kind of look at AI, and I think most people sort of assume that this is like the end state of it or near the end state. Dude, this is like version 0.1. It's going to get way crazier from here. And we don't know how exactly that plays out. But it's going to be a fun ride.
Well, I think it's to your point of version 0.1. Like I remember when ChatGPT first came onto the scene, was it 2 years ago now? I mean, time is, I mean, flying by. But when ChatGPT first came out, it was like, oh, this is kind of cute, like I can, talk to this, AI chat thing, and it could write me an essay, and the essay kind of sucks, but it's cool that I could see it writing in real time, and oh, it could research some things on the internet. That's cool. And like even now, like fast forward 2 years, and we have apps like Sora and Google VEO, right, that are creating videos, and you see all these crazy movies that are coming out, these short movies that are being made with AI, and um, yeah, it's and just the rate of you know technological progression has been. I mean, I feel like it's only getting quicker and quicker as we kind of move along.
One really interesting idea to think about is the idea of the singularity, which is basically like when computers sort of exceed human intelligence and have the ability to sort of build themselves. And I saw just on X today, I saw that an AI came up with a net new insight into cancer treatment that hadn't existed before. And that's potentially a big milestone. I did it in 2021. I went to Hawaii for 2 weeks and it rained for the entire trip. So I did a deep dive into AI and read like 10 books on AI. And the biggest idea that came out of all that work was the idea of the recursive nature of AI is when you hit that point, they call the singularity, when the AI can build better AI than humans can, then it becomes rapidly recursive and it starts to accelerate. And I think that's when things get really interesting. It's still a question mark about whether that will really happen or not. Because right now AI is really just like a very, it's essentially a magic trick. It's like really good at regurgitating all the knowledge that already exists. It's like a mashup machine. But when it starts being able to create net new ideas and net new insights, that's when things will get crazy.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably spend this entire podcast talking about AI. And I think I definitely want to do a podcast on AI at some point. It'd be cool to do like a little roundtable or maybe a little debate style format and bring people with different viewpoints in. Because even talking to my friends, like everyone has a different viewpoint on AI. Again, you have the doomsdayer on one side, and you have the just the unrelenting optimist on the other side, and those two seemingly always clash. And I feel like probably the reality is somewhere in the middle, but it's always an interesting topic to talk about. Kevin, I did want to get a little bit or dive a little bit into your story, your journey, kind of a little bit more about your background, and something that sparked my interest is when you were talking at the beginning of this podcast about why people should stick around and listen. You mentioned that you've had some failures where you've lost millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And I think it's always interesting to dive into people's failures because I think, as I see from my own experience, we tend to learn a lot more from our failures than our success.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what those failures were and what did you learn from them?
Yeah. So I think there's two failures in my life that are worth mentioning. And I'll talk briefly about both of them. We can dive in however you want. The first one is like more of a classic failure where I was 27 years old. You mentioned like the original .com era. That was I was in my late 20s in the late 90s when the original .com boom happened. I wanted a piece of that. So I started my own company. It was an early e-commerce company. And we raised $12 million in venture capital, which at that time was a very significant amount. I know 12 million today is like a pre-seed round, but at the time, 12 million was very significant. And we rode the wave all the way up. And then if you were there, you remember, things turned very quickly. The market imploded. Raising money was impossible. And so we ended up shutting down the company. We actually sold the company for pennies on the dollar, and which turned out really great for me because I got acqui-hired into another business that was successful. But trust me, as a first-time entrepreneur, like having to tell your investors who put 12 million bucks into a company, having to tell your 90 employees that you're shutting down, I call that my MBA on steroids. And honestly, it's the classic same lessons that everybody learns around the ultimate defense against, what's happening in the market is just having a profitable business, and which is like ironically, if you fast forward to today, which we'll talk about this later, my current business is the opposite of that. Like we bootstrapped the business; it was cash flow positive from day one, and boy, is that a lot of fun. So that's like the classic failure, but and then we can dig into that if you want. The more interesting one to me was a failure of knowing what I was chasing. So this happened later in life. So what I didn't mention in my intro is, I worked my way up the corporate ladder, ended up being in the upper echelons of business. I was a executive in a multi-billion dollar public company, getting paid, well into the seven figures. I was in my mid 40s. On paper, I checked all the boxes that define success, but I was miserable, and I was miserable because I'd never taken the time to define what success means for me. And it kind of goes back to this whole idea of like, there's really no version of me in the corporate world that feels successful no matter how much money I'm making, just because of the way I'm wired. So the notable thing that I did that most people won't is I literally, at the age of 47, I quit my job with no plan for the future. I lived in Dallas, Texas at the time. I moved my family to Boulder, which was incredibly disruptive, hard on the family, hard on the marriage, everything. And we did a complete reboot because basically I had failed to achieve my version of success. And so the happy outcome is, and it took years, we sort of rebooted and rebuilt. And fast forward to today, like I pinch myself, I joke that, I've got the best life of anybody I know, but it only happened because I had this dramatic reboot and I did a reset.
So how did you start down the path of trying to define what success meant to you?
Yeah. Well, first of it was just realizing that despite having checked all the boxes, I just wasn't happy. And furthermore, I looked around in the executive suite and none of them were happy either. In fact, they were more miserable than I was. They had broken family relationships, they were not healthy. And as a result of all this soul searching, I actually developed an exercise that now has been used by hundreds of people. It's called the ideal end state exercise. And the way it works is very simple. You get out a piece of paper or your notes app on your iPhone, and you literally just bullet out what, if you had no constraints on your life, what would your life look like? And I'm talking about like, where would you be? Who would you be around? What would you do with your time? Things like that. And like, so like things on my list are simple things like get sunshine every day, control 80% of my calendar, be involved in creative projects at all times with my kids. I have about 25 or 30 items on my list. And what's shocking is when you put that list together, like we all have this vision in our mind of what ideal life would look like. But when you actually take the time to put it on paper, it often turns out quite different than you thought. And I did that exercise and I looked at it as like, I'm not living this life. Like, this is what I say is the life I want. My life, even though it looks good on paper, is not that. And so then you can start aligning all of your actions with that, which is actually the harder part, right? And so in my case, it was like a rip the Band-Aid off moment. The reason I preach about this a lot, though, today and encourage people to do this ideal end state exercise is hopefully you can be much more deliberate about it than I was. Hopefully you don't have to wait until you're 47 and blow up your entire life to get there. Hopefully you can get there quickly. The beauty of it is when people look at their ideal end state, one of the big epiphanies they have is that it usually doesn't require as much money as they thought. I think everybody in there, when I speak publicly, and I do this quite a bit, I often say like everybody in their minds has like an FU number, like a dollar amount that like if I had this much money, I would have this incredible life. And it's really based on nothing. It's a random choice. When you go through this exercise and define your ideal end state, it allows you to be more tangible about it. And what happens in most cases is you realize, gosh, most of the things in my ideal life don't require $10 million. I can simplify my life and live this great life way, way faster.
Yeah, you speaking right now reminded me of Tim Ferriss in the 4 Hour Work Week had this great chapter, and I, for the life of me, I can't remember what it's called. I'm probably going to butcher it. I think it was called The Man in the Red BMW. That could be completely wrong. Essentially, the point of the chapter was he was like, hey, if you're working any job, it could be a corporate job, any job, look at someone who is 10 or 15 years ahead of you in that same career path
Yeah.
and ask yourself, would I want that job? Like, could I see myself being happy in that job? If the answer is yes, great. Like, stick to the path. You're on the right path. Keep going, keep pushing. If the answer is no, well, then you got to go back and you got to do something about it. And it's funny. I mean, similarly, like even now, like for my day job, I work in a big corporation, and um, the reason I started the podcast is because I read that portion of the 4 hour work week, and then I asked myself, do I want to be one of these executives? Because that was like that is the career path that I am
Yeah.
on. And I even like started having one-on-one meetings with them, like almost like mentorship meetings. And the whole point was like, let me try to gain some insight. Like, what does this person's day-to-day life look like? Like, what is their what are their responsibilities? What is their calendar? What is right? And the more I found out about their jobs, the more I was like, oh, this is not for me. Like I respect the people in that position. I do not want to do this. And so that's what led me down the path of this podcast. But I was reminded of that when you were saying about the ideal state and how it's kind
Yeah.
of connected. It's like trying to envision, like, what do you actually want your life to be?
Well, kudos to you for starting a side hustle that kind of moves you toward the path of living your true self. The key point here is we conflate a great career with a great life. A great career is not a great life. In fact, they're often in conflict. And I can tell you, I've been to the mountaintop. Like I've been in the C-suite at public companies. I've met all the top private equity firms, all the top venture capital firms. And I can tell you that almost all those guys do not have great lives, at least by my definition. Maybe by their definition they do, although it sure doesn't seem that way because many of them have told me they're miserable. And so, look, I think work is important. I enjoy my work. I want to make money. I want to be successful, but and there's a season of life for putting your head down and grinding for sure, but do it with the end in mind. And I would tell you, I would say that the reason that I feel successful today is because I still do cool things at work. I mean, I just started a company, but that's probably the smaller part of my identity at this point. It's maybe like 20% of who I am. And the bigger portions lie outside of work.
I think it's also important to note here, like this is in no way an ad for entrepreneurship or an ad for podcasting. Really, all this is I would almost view it as a call to action to figure out like what do you truly want out of this life. And Naval has this great thing. I brought him up earlier in this podcast, but he has this great thing. And I think he mentions 3 questions that everyone should ask themselves. Who do you want to marry? What do you want to do for work? And where do you want to live?
Yep.
And if you can get those 3 things right, like chances are high you're going to live a good life. And I think the
Yep.
problem is that not too many people actually stop and ask themselves those
Yep.
questions. Like where you live is such a simple one, and I'm so glad that at the beginning of this podcast, you had mentioned Colorado and Boulder. My sister went to Boulder to see you, Boulder, so I'm familiar with the area and the beautiful nature. But like I could tell, like when you were talking about Boulder, like you had very specific reasons for why you live there, right? Nature, sunshine, right? Outdoor activities. It's very specific. But I guarantee you, if you were asked most people, like, "Hey, why do you live in this city?" I don't know. My parents grew up here and kind of just where I'm at, or work is here, so I guess I'm here too. It's really remarkable, like how little, and this is in no way belittling anyone, because I've certainly been, I've been there, done that. Like I'm in no way trying to put myself above anyone. Like I've made those same mistakes, but just how little sometimes we think about some of the decisions that we make.
Dude, I could go on an hour-long rant about this because the importance of place. Where you live is your aquarium, and you're the fish. It literally, your environment impacts everything, even more than your choice of life partner. And so, what I find crazy, Nick, is of the 3 things Naval mentioned, people tend to be pretty deliberate about who they marry, right? Like you date people, you decide who you want to be with, and we don't always get it right. But when we get it wrong, you'll get divorced and you'll try to find somebody else. People are pretty deliberate about their career, like they work hard and they'll change jobs and they'll pivot. But when it comes to place, like where you live, that triggers every fear known to mankind. People live where they live simply because that's where they live, and they won't change it. even though in my view, it's equally important to those other two things. And so I'm a huge believer in, and that's why, by the way, like this ideal end state, which is really just diving deeper into those questions that Naval posed, is so powerful because it forces you to face all these things. Like, what is success to me? And I would say if people take nothing away from this podcast other than that one thing, if you just do that one exercise, which takes 20 minutes, I promise you it will change the way you think.
What is your relationship with money like?
Yeah. Well, before my reboot, it was the same as everybody else's, which is more, more, more. I tell this story is that when I was the CMO for this multi-billion-dollar company in Dallas, this is going to sound hard for your listeners to believe, but me and all the other C-level executives were making seven figures a year, and we literally felt poor. We were spending all of it. We used to joke that the only way we saved money was through annual bonuses, but we spent most of that also. And so it's what I call the hamster wheel. Harvard did an incredible study you may have heard of. Harvard Business School surveyed 2,000 millionaires, and these were people who had a net worth between $1 million and $100 million. And they asked them, how much money would you need to feel satisfied? And the answer shocked the researchers because it was the same across the board. It didn't matter what your net worth was. The answer was always twice as much. And that's what I call the hamster wheel. One thing that really changed the way I view money, it's a very simple thing, is the 4% rule and the FIRE movement. I ran across the blog of Mr. Money Mustache, who's now actually a friend of mine. He lives here in Colorado. I get together with Pete actually all the time. But that simple framework really changed that, in combination with the ideal end state exercise, really changed the way I think about money. And I'd say I have a much healthier. So I'll make a statement that is powerful, I think, and not many people can say, is that I walked away from more money than I have today. I was a made man. I could have just sat in an office and collected another $20 million by doing a decent job, decent work. I was 47 and I walked away from that and chose to have less money because it was more important to me at that time to have freedom and to live my ideal life. And I realized because of the 4% rule, like I'm pretty close to being there. Like I'm pretty close to being there already. I'm in fact not poor. I've got plenty of money.
So I'm curious, by the way, Mr. Money Mustache, just love his work, love his blog. I've been a long time reader. So what changed? You mentioned being, a C-suite executive and joking around that you were poor and all the other executives were poor. And now you're on your own. I'm assuming you're living a lot of what you would define as your ideal end state. And yet your relationship with money has gotten a lot better. Like what was different between Kevin as an executive and Kevin today?
Yeah. Love this question because there was a very clear catalyst in my life, and it's rock climbing. So in 1999, I went with a buddy to a climbing gym in Dallas, Texas, and I didn't know it at the time, but a seed was planted, and that seed would ultimately lead to that reboot. So something about climbing just clicked for me on all levels. I loved the physical act. I loved the places it takes you. I loved the technical aspects to it, and especially loved the community. I joke that, I came for the climbing, I stayed for the community. And what I saw was, for the first time, I found my tribe. And it was a tribe of people for whom, like your net worth didn't determine your value as a person. In fact, they don't care what you do for a living. They don't care how much money you have. And it was so refreshing and so attractive to me. And I also found people who were living a lifestyle that was incredibly rich. They had amazing lives. They were making literally 1/10 of my income. And so I was like, it kind of blew my mind. I was like, I've got to understand this better. And ultimately, I got deeper and deeper into the climbing world. And it was really that culture that showed me that there is a different way to live. And it's really unfortunate. And it doesn't have to be climate, it can be whatever. But it's really unfortunate that these days we are not exposed to that different way of living. In fact, what gets reinforced through social media is more of the societal definition of success, right? And deep inside, we know that these people we idolize are probably not happy and don't have awesome lives, and yet we chase that, we emulate them anyway. And so what I always say is like, be super careful who you emulate, because you just might get there. And so pick people who to emulate, who not only have had success in their career maybe, but have the type of life that you want. So dig deeper.
Why do you think that is? And maybe this is a good segue. I had a question lined up here about hustle porn, and I know you're big on X and Twitter,
Yeah.
and that is a big. I mean, at least from the posts that I see, and I'm sure that you come across, right? Like this idea of hustle porn, this idea that you need to be hustling 24/7, grinding 24/7, work, et cetera, et cetera. The only way to succeed is to outwork everyone. Um, like why is it that we emulate these people? Like Elon Musk is a perfect example, someone who works so hard, and I always remember so Mr. Beast, Jimmy Donaldson did this interview on Diary of a CEO, and he said, so many people want to be like me, but if you just knew like a tenth of what I go through on a day-to-day basis, if you just knew the reality of my mental health, I guarantee you, like, you would not want to be me. But people don't see that. So all of that to say kind of leads me to my question, like, why is it that we view those types of people in such high regard, and we want to emulate them so bad?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. I mean, one is, we see the spoils of financial wealth, and there's something to be said for that for sure. But I think you nailed it. It's like, Elon Musk, the most successful businessman in history, literally has said, "You don't want my life. It's a tortured existence." Like literally, he said it in those words, and yet we sort of throw those words aside. We ignore what Mr. Beast says about his life, because we want 100 million followers on YouTube. We think about how cool that would be. And look, to be clear, two things can be true at the same time. I think, look, there is a season for putting your head down and grinding. I mean, I certainly did it in my 20s, my 30s, whatever, into my 40s. But I think the point we've been talking about this whole episode is do it with the end in mind. Like it's a means to an end. It's not the end. I think when it gets dangerous is when that hustle becomes the end in itself. And I'll give an example, like Alex Hormozy. He says a lot of smart things. Like I actually take, like, sometimes he'll say something, I'm like, you know what? I actually need to take heed of that. But at the same time, I think it's kind of toxic, because to him, the whole goal is to hustle forever. And maybe that's okay for him. We'll see how that plays out. But I think for most people, like I always tell people, don't emulate outliers, because you're probably not one. Nick, you're probably not Elon Musk. No offense.
No,
You're probably
probably
not
not.
Mr. Beast. Same for me. And so, like, you're not going to be able to emulate Elon Musk even if you tried, nor necessarily should you want to. And he would be the first to say that. So again, like, be careful what you chase, because you just might get it.
I think that's such a great point. I love that last line. Be careful what you chase, because you just might get it. I I love Hormozy too. Like I have a whole like note. If you go to my notes app on my phone or on my laptop, like I just have quotes of his. Like I retweet his things all the time on X. Like I'm a big fan, and I think he says a lot of smart things. I do agree with you that it is dangerous just a little bit, because people, I think, take his advice and just generalize it to their lives, when your specific situation and your specific personality may not actually be um in tune with his, certainly, or in tune with the lifestyle that he has. Like perfect example, right? Like um So whatever, I mean, I'm not gonna get into politics, but Donald Trump, I just know because he has this thing. But I think it's been shown that there's like this genetic mutation that certain people have where they only need like 4 hours of sleep every night,
Yeah.
and they can be fine. But like if I were to sit here and be like, oh great, like if he can run on 4 hours of sleep, like I can too. So let me just get 4 hours of sleep every night when I know like that is not me. Like my body needs at least 7 hours every night. Like
Well,
I've trust me,
yeah.
I've tried it, and so all of that to say, like it's dangerous to your point to take all this advice in a vacuum and just try to generalize it to your own life because you may, like you said, you're probably not a Hermosi or a Musk or any one of these people.
Well, there, again, there are outliers. You're probably not one. I'm probably not one in any dimension, right? Need for
Right.
sleep or whatever. Um, Look, I would tell you that the because I've run so hard for so long, I've been to the mountaintop. I've been in rooms with billionaires, some of the most successful people in the world, and I can tell you, like, if I made a list now at 54, if I listed out the things that I value most, my financial net worth is at the bottom of the list. The things I value today: family, having a close knit, healthy family; my physical health, being really fit. I was on my ideal end state. It says top 0.1% fit for my age group. I value that I help others a lot. I value that I sleep well at night because I do the right things. And I can assure you that when anybody is 80 years old, those are the things, like I always say, like, go to an old folks home and talk to the people there and ask them what memories they cherish most or what they cherish most in their life. Do you think they're going to whip out their phone and like show you their Chase bank account balance? Nobody cares when you're 80. What they're going to talk about is their loved ones and the amazing experiences they had. So I always say that camera roll trumps bankroll. I will. I run in circles where most of my friends are extremely wealthy. I'm probably the least wealthy of any of them, but my camera roll crushes theirs. Like the experiences I've had over the past, especially in the past 8 years since moving to Boulder, I'll stack that up against anybody.
So what's your advice? I mean, I think especially when we're younger or maybe just around the age, like I'm close to 30. So maybe this is kind of the age where you start to look around and, you have a friend who's on Wall Street and he's making, whatever, a couple million
Yeah.
bucks a year. Maybe you have another friend who started their own thing and they're making some money. And here you are trying to do your own thing and you're not making a ton of money. And I feel like when we're younger, like these status games really wear on us. And despite that, like we may know that, all right, end state when I'm 80, like you said, none of this is going to matter. But still in that moment, like in that specific moment, like you're just always thinking about, well, how much money is person X making, or, am I stacking
Oh,
up with my friends? So like, how do you in the present, in this specific moment, wrestle with that and try to remind yourself of what the end state it looks like?
yeah. Well, comparison is the thief of joy, and nobody can be perfect in terms of like not comparing themselves to others. It's naturally, and especially on social media, you get pounded with it all the time. And on X, I spend a lot of time on X or Twitter, and like people are always bragging about their success. First thing to remember is most of the time that's it's very inflated what people are saying. But even when it's true, I think what you have to when I have those moments, I just quickly remind myself that, like, what would I change about my life and to make it better? And I've already won. I've already got the life I want. And so it really comes down. That's why, Nick, it's so important to define the end goal. Because if, let's say you define your end goal very clearly, you're marching toward it, and then you run across someone who's like, they've got a private jet. And that would be so rad to have a private jet. This is something I personally deal with, so I'm using it as an example. And then you have to ask yourself the question: okay, do I need to revisit my ideal end state? Should having a private jet be on my ideal end state? There's nothing wrong with that because they're amazing. Um, And then, but for me, I realized that putting a private jet on my list would be a downgrade for my life because of the things that come with it, right? And so you have, I guess what I'm saying is by defining that end state very clearly, like what does success mean to me? You can always kind of do this comparison and say, okay, let me if I feel this FOMO or this envy of someone else, let me double click on that and say, is it just like a passing weird thought, or did I get my end state wrong? Because it's entirely possible. So the example I always use, I think this really drives it home for people, is like, um, I'll do this end state exercise with people, and they'll typically have like, they'll make a good pass at it, and you rarely does it say on there, I want to drive a fancy car, right? I want to drive a Ferrari. In my perfect life, I'm driving a Ferrari. If it does, that's okay, but most people don't. But then I'll see that they actually are doing that. Like they drive a fancy car and it comes with a $1,500 a month car payment. And I'm like, well, where's the disconnect? Either you lied on your ideal end state and you really do value having a fancy car, or you need to make a change in your behavior because that $1,500 a month car payment is actually keeping you from other things that are on your list, like achieving financial independence. And so it just provides a really clear sort of litmus test for all of your behaviors. And when you have a feeling, you can sort of challenge that feeling by saying, okay, did I get my ideal end state wrong? Or is this just like a passing feeling of envy?
I really like that framework of um who do you get jealous of? Like who do
Yeah.
you whose
And
life
why?
do you look at and right, like whose life do you look at and you think, damn, that's a pretty cool life. Like I wish I could live that. And then why do you think that? I really like that. I just wrote that down.
Well,
Because
here's a great question for you, Nick, and I think everybody will relate to it. Like, if you really think about it, and I'm not going to put you on the spot by asking you this, but can you name a person whose entire life you would want to emulate it? It's actually, when you really think about it, it's very, very hard to find an individual who has um, an entire life that you want to emulate. Yes, there are parts of everybody's life that you want to emulate. Like, I want his private jet. I want, his power. I want this guy's like level of fitness. But it's very hard to find someone to emulate who has, and I can think of maybe like one or two. I'm 54. I've met a lot of people. I can think of like one or two who are like 90% of where I want to be. Those are the people to take advice from and to emulate. It's insane to take advice from someone who like has one part of the life you want, but other parts, the other 80% is not what you want.
yeah, that's so true. I mean, even when you were framing that question, I was trying to think, and the first kind of group of people that came to mind were athletes, but even then, like I certainly don't want to train the amount
Yeah.
that they do. And I mean, there's certain aspects, different aspects of their life, like privacy is one of them, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're a very well known athlete, like that gets kind of difficult. So yeah, that's a good question, and I think that's important to note too, because I don't think you need to force yourself, and that's also why I had always had a kind of a weird relationship with role models. Like when people would say like, oh, so and so is my role model, it's like, well, it's kind of dangerous to want to model your entire life after one man or woman, because again, there, I mean, as we've mentioned on this podcast, there's certainly aspects of it that you probably don't want. um
Yeah. Well, here's a
and
great
and
example.
like you were saying earlier.
I was going to
Yeah,
say
go ahead, go ahead.
the athlete one is an interesting one because that actually is like the idea of being like a pro quarterback or something is super appealing. I'll tell you an eye opening experience for me is one of my best friends was an All American in college and played in the NFL for 10 years, had an incredibly successful career. But the toll that took on his body. So he is about 4 years younger than me, but his body is a mess. And I look at that now and I think, he had amazing experiences that I'll never have, obviously, while playing in the NFL. But I'm so thankful at 54, my body is 100%. In fact, I feel better than I've ever felt in my life. I would not trade that for all the experiences and all the money in the world. I would not sacrifice my body for that.
That's a great point. I just had Braden Fajoko on the podcast. He was defensive lineman for the Chargers and the Steelers, and we were talking about some of the just the NFL life and on all that good stuff. And he was saying that he went golfing with a former Dallas Cowboy, and this guy was 47 years old, and he had a walking cane, and his wife had to help him walk and do basic things because his body was just destroyed from playing in the NFL. And I mean, there's countless examples of that. So again, like, is that something that you want? Like, are you willing to sacrifice your health and your body at 47, for the glory and the fame at maybe 25? So again, just questions you have to ask yourself.
And there's no right or wrong answer. Like you said, you just have to ask
Right.
yourself the question. I can tell you, because I pulled up my ideal end state list, mine definitively says be top 0.1% fit for my age group. So that would eliminate being an NFL star right off the bat, probably. Not that I had any athletic talent to do that anyway, but
yeah. Kevin, I want to take us to this topic of luck and just the role it plays in success.
yeah.
And I want to set this up with a great tweet that you had, and I'll read it here for the audience.
Sure.
You said 1 in 13 men are millionaires, but only 1 in 140 can bench press 225 pounds. We like to believe rich people got lucky, and some do. But if success can be explained by luck, why is fitness, which is entirely within our control, 10 times more rare? Explain that tweet.
Damn, dude, that's a banger tweet. I didn't even realize you said it out loud. I got to repost that one.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I have a whole rant on this. Like, it's comforting to believe that any form of success is mostly about luck. And obviously, there are the outlier examples of like the proverbial lottery winners, right? That's obviously pure luck. But in most cases, we have way more control over the outcome than we like to admit. And what I often say is luck is the multiplier. So like, if you're a founder of a company, whether that company is successful or not is mostly in your control. The magnitude of the outcome is very much about luck. And I'll give you the prime example is what happened from 2010 to 2020 during the zero interest rate period. I had a bunch of friends who were in real estate, and these are smart guys who would have been successful in any environment over the long term. But because they happened to start their businesses right after the great financial crisis, their timing was perfect and they made $100 million. Like I have several friends who made $100 million in real estate in a regular environment, like today, they still would have over 10 years, 15 years, they still would have become multimillionaires, but they wouldn't have been flying in a private jet like they do. And so luck is the multiplier. It's not the primary determinant in success. And I think you can apply that to any area of your life, to your health, to your career, to your marriage. A great marriage is not just because you got lucky and married the right person, but every marriage struggles. It's because you did the work and you did it consistently.
I think about podcasting, right? Like there's so many podcasters who started either right at the end of 2019 or during the pandemic. And now they're huge. And certainly during that time, like people started listening to podcasts a lot more. We were all indoors, we were all bored, right? So we turned to things to entertain us. Yes, some of those people still would have made it, even if it had not been for the pandemic. Like there are people who are innately talented, insanely talented at, podcasting, asking questions, interviewing, all that good stuff. But, the fact that podcasts took off during that period of time certainly helped.
Totally.
And that's not to take away from anyone's success, and not to say like, by no means is this a stretch or trying to connect some dots and say, well, they didn't work hard and they just got lucky and all these things. But like, you would also be a fool if you just ignored the aspect of luck and timing and some of these things.
Yeah, and luck does usually come in the form of timing, and it's not an either or, it's an and. So like Joe Rogan, if he started a podcast today, he'd probably be successful, at it, marginally successful. He wouldn't be the number one podcast in the world. That was a timing thing. He came in, Ferris came in at exactly the right time. and they worked their asses off and did episode after episode shouting into the void before they got traction.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Like, you need to have, like, you need to be talented at the thing that you're wanting to do, right? Like, if I sucked at interviewing people, it doesn't matter how, how much I work hard at it, how much I, right? Like, there is some point where it's like, all right, there's a difference between the people at the top and then me and then maybe others. So like, there is some aspect to it, but like, I mentioned Braden Fajoko, who I had on, former NFL player, and we were talking about success in the NFL and how, and I believe he had said these three things, but he had said timing, availability, and opportunity
Mm-hmm.
were like the three pillars for success in the NFL. And I'd argue that availability is probably the only one that you have direct control over. So
Yeah.
availability meaning, injury, are you fit? Like,
Right.
if you were to play tomorrow, could you? And even
Right.
then, like, there's some injuries, freak accidents happen. But timing and opportunity, like, those are largely out of your control. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, there's only so much you can do. So it is a little unsettling to think, like, even, as we're going on this journey of entrepreneurship or whatever you're starting, that despite how hard you may try, like, there are things out of your control that can contribute to failure.
Well, I think I would argue that the professional sports thing is a bad analogy for that because that is an arena where you kind of have to be a freak, right? So, like, I can practice all I want, I can be available all I want. I'm not going to be Michael Jordan, right? I'm not going to make
Mhm.
it in the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, whatever. Um, that is but I would say a freak of nature has 100% chance of making it in the NFL, right? So if you're Adrian Peterson, or if you're Bijan Robinson in today's world, like, it was clear from the time Bijan was in high school, he was a freak, right? Then he went to the University of Texas, actually didn't even have that great of a career at the University of Texas. But everybody knew he was a freak. And, look what's happening today. In the real world, the playing field, the bar is much lower, is a good way to put it, right? So the truth is, in the real world, most people won't even show up, and almost nobody will show up consistently, and fewer still will show up consistently and have a good attitude and a positive mindset. And so it's in the real world, it's much more of a war of attrition than like a selection where only the absolute best make it, like in the sports world. It's a war of attrition where just showing up consistently, doing the work, having a good attitude sort of makes success inevitable. Now, again, the multiplier on that is, do you get lucky on top of that, right? So, like, I would argue that I'm a great example because I've done well financially, but I've never had a massive home run. I've been in startups where, like, they got sold or went public, but I kind of got like a small payout. Whereas I've had friends who came out of college, joined Facebook, got a few thousand shares, and are now worth $50 million because they were in the right place, right? That's the multiplier. They would have been successful anywhere, but they're worth 50 million because they happened to land at Facebook.
I have I was looking off to the side because I'm pulling up a tweet here from Sam Altman that I wanted to read, his perspective on luck, since we're talking about it. But I have a friend who joined NVIDIA back in 2019, I think.
Yep.
And it's funny because we kind of lost touch post college, but I hit him up recently and I was like, hey man, you're doing pretty well now, huh? Kind of joking, but um, and NVIDIA wasn't even his first choice. He kind of just applied as a, well, if I don't get Google, if I don't get Facebook, Meta
Right.
now, I'll go to NVIDIA, whatever, my third choice. And I mean, it ended up being the best choice for him, for
Yeah.
financially. Um,
But
I have
again, like, I'm guessing your buddy would have found some form of success elsewhere, but it wouldn't
right,
have been NVIDIA type success.
right, right. Like, he's driving, Porsche's traveling the world. So yeah,
Yeah,
maybe, maybe he'd be driving, I don't know what's a tier below a Porsche, right? And maybe not traveling the world as frequently, but,
that's right.
so Sam Altman has an interesting perspective on luck. I wanted to read this tweet to you. He says, give yourself a lot of shots to get lucky is even better advice than it appears on the surface. Luck is not an independent variable, but increases superlinearly with more surface area. You meet more people, make more connections between new ideas, learn patterns, etc.
Yeah.
What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, totally agree. That's the geekiest possible way to say it, Sam Altman. But what he's talking about is shots on goal, right? And there's a lot to be said for taking a lot of shots on goal. And the point he's really making there is that it's not just purely about quantity, but quality is a function of quantity. In other words, if I take a bunch of shots on goal over time, my shots on goal are going to start getting better. And so absolutely is true. Now, you have to balance that with not giving up too soon. Because, right, like what I counsel for young entrepreneurs, and I meet with a lot of young, like guys in their 20s who are starting their first company, whatever, is realistically in that world, you only get a handful of shots on goal, right? Especially as a founder, because a company, you have to assume that when you start a company, it's a 5 to 10 year commitment, right? Even in a success scenario, it's a 5 to 10 year commitment. So what you really want to do is have the discernment to know if something's not working, don't pour 5 or 10 years of your life into it so that you can get more shots on goal. And if you have that mindset and you get smarter with every shot, then success does sort of become inevitable, especially in a place like Silicon Valley. Like it's not that hard actually to pick the winners. Like if you go, for example, if you go work for across the course of, let's say 10, 15 years, if you go work for 5 startups that are all have traction, you're almost certain to have success.
Yeah, it's I think the whole concept of shots on goal is I mean, obviously interesting, but I think about it even within content. I know you're big on X. It's the reason why I love content so much, and it's one of the reasons why it excites me as much as it does is because any clip that you post, any video that you post, any tweet that you put out is essentially a lottery ticket. And you have no idea if it's the winning lottery ticket, if it's a losing lottery ticket, but if it wins, I mean, your entire life changes overnight. And you have, these quote unquote overnight success stories, which really weren't overnight, but instead were, these 10 years of hard work. And then, one piece of content, blows up or it hits the right audience. And now all of a sudden, you've quote unquote made it. Like, I think of Mark Manson as a perfect example of this. So when he first wrote the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, right? He puts it out and all of a sudden people are like, oh, who's this Mark Manson? Like he came out of nowhere, like overnight success. And then he was like, wait, like I did this blog for 10, 15 years that nobody read, like nobody knew who Mark Manson was.
Oh, yeah.
And now all of a sudden, like I have a New York Times bestseller and you're like, oh, overnight success. Like, no, slow down. Like I was doing this for like 15 years with
Right.
nobody watching or reading.
What's the proverbial, overnight success 10 years in the making? What I would say is, here's the sad part. And this is maybe a call to action for your listeners. Most people will take 0 shots on goal. Like most people will just go through the motions, do the basics, but never make a bold move. And when I talk about making bold moves and taking shots on goal, it's in all areas of life. I mean, maybe it could mean asking a girl out that you find cute at the coffee shop. Most people won't do that. Moving to your happy place. For me, it's bolder. For you, it's something else. Most people will never do that. Starting a side hustle like a podcast, like you did. Most people will never do that. Starting a business. Most people will never do that. And I've got a great story for you of taking shots on goal. Even for me now at a later stage of life, it's funny. Almost exactly a year ago today, I was debating whether to start this new business that I've got. And I was honestly like 50-50 on the fence. It's like, gosh, do I really want to? I know exactly what it takes to make a business successful. Do I really want to go through that heartache, put in all that work? What if it fails? I was really on the fence, and I happened to be at a peer group event with a bunch of entrepreneurs, and I was socializing the idea, and I got really positive feedback and decided, you know what? I'd rather err on the side of going for it. So I started the business. Fast forward a year, it's a $70,000 a month business now, growing very rapidly. I'm having a blast. And so had that one simple decision to take a shot on goal now has become something real, and it could become something big.
Another banger tweet of yours. We underestimate the degree to which our lives are defined by a handful of pivotal moments.
Totally. Dang, dude, I got some good stuff out there. I need to go back and read some of this stuff. It's so true. It's like that one decision. It's like sliding doors. It's an old movie if you've ever seen it. We're like, I think about this a lot. Actually, it's like one decision that can change everything, but you don't know it at the time. That's the challenge. And the example I think I used in that tweet was I said hi in 1989. I went to college, literally my first day on campus. I was standing in line and I said hi to this cute girl. And nothing sort of came of it. But fast forward to today, 2025, I've been married to that girl for 28 years. It would have been very easy to do what most guys would do and just sort of like admire that girl from afar and never say hi. But that one thing, that one little decision was a pivotal moment in my entire life.
I have trying to see how I want to set this up. I have a very morbid way of looking at this, and then I have how Jeff Bezos looked at it, which I think is a little less morbid, but I think kind of points in the same direction. So my morbid way of looking at this is I'm going to die one day, and I mean we're all going to die. That is a fact of life. And you know what? God damn it! If I'm going to die, like I want to go out swinging in this life. And I want to start the podcast. I want to put out the content. I want to ask Kevin to come on my podcast. I want to be able to talk to him. And you know what? One day when I'm on my deathbed and I'm thinking back to my life, like we talk about, talking to senior citizens earlier, I want to think back to some of these moments and be proud of myself and say, you know what, Nick, maybe you failed. Maybe you didn't get the girl. Maybe the podcast, didn't work out the way that you wanted it to, but you know what? God damn it. You had the courage and the confidence to go out and try.
Yeah.
Maybe the more succinct way of looking at this is what Jeff Bezos calls his regret minimization framework, which is just a fancy way of saying, hey, one day when I'm 80 and when I think back on my regrets in life, I want to be able to minimize the amount of regrets that I have.
Yeah.
And I've told the story before on the podcast. You could look it up, but it's one of my favorites. When he's on a walk with his boss, I think he was working at a PE firm, and his boss was like, hey, Jeff, you're doing great. You're going to make a lot of money. You're going to rise up in this company quickly. Like you're essentially set. Just stay on the path and you are golden. And Jeff turns to him and he says, well, I'm thinking about starting this online bookstore. Like this internet thing is gaining a lot of popularity. It's growing at 500% a year. Like I really think there's something here. And like I was thinking about things that I could sell on the internet that can't go bad and that can't get spoiled. Like food is a bad thing, right? But books are forever. And his boss looks at him and he says, why would you do that? And then Jeff goes into the whole thing like, well, one day when I'm 80, I think I'm going to regret not starting Amazon more than I would regret staying at this company. So there is a morbid way of saying I'm going to die, and then I think you can use Jeff Bezos's method and just say, I just want to minimize the amount of regrets that I have in my life, whichever maybe method works for you. Or if you have a better method, I'll end my rant here because I want to get your perspective on it. So I had Derek Sivers on the podcast, and Derek, fantastic entrepreneur. Speaking of people that I want to emulate my life after, like he certainly has a lot of things and a lot of qualities that I just absolutely adore about him. His new book, Useful Not True, I have sent I don't know how many copies to my friends, and I can't recommend it enough. And he has this thing where we all have these beliefs, and you listen to podcasts like mine, and Kevin and I are sitting here and telling you like, hey, you need to do this and you need to do that and you need to have this belief and you should think about things in this manner. And Derek is like, listen, whatever is beneficial to you, whatever belief, whatever thought, whatever exercise is beneficial to you, use that. For Kevin, it may be something, right? And the example that I just brought up is perfect. Maybe it's useful for you to think about death and to think about the fact that you are going to die one day. So let me go out swinging. Great, use that. Maybe it is useful for you to think about Jeff Bezos and his regret minimization framework. Great, use that. Maybe both of those do not work for you. Great, use something else. At the end of the day, use whatever is beneficial for you and what is going to get you out of your chair or in your chair to go and do the damn thing. End of rant.
First of all, Sivers is full of bangers. So he's the ultimate banger essay writer. He's awesome. I don't know him personally, but I've followed him for a long time. But if you talk to a bunch of old people and ask them what are their biggest regrets in life, almost nobody will say, I tried this really bold thing and it failed, and I have so much regret. Nobody will say that. What people will say is their biggest regret is always like, I wish I had done this. I wish I had been more aggressive. I wish I had asked that girl out. I wish I had left my corporate job and started a business. It's always the things they didn't do. So the only guaranteed failure is if you don't try. I would say, just to counter a little bit of this, like whatever works for you, is I do think that there is such a thing as absolute truth, and there are things that work and things that don't, right? And I think what you can learn from others is you can observe, and you can observe like the outcomes that come from certain behaviors. And that's kind of like when I had my reboot in my 40s, I was observing that like something that these executives were doing wasn't working. Like they were doing all the things that society said defines success, but they weren't happy. So where's the disconnect? And so I do think, for example, one absolute truth is like, no matter how successful you are in your career, it's not going to be enough. At some point, it's not going to be enough. No matter how much money you have, it's not going to be enough. And so that's a truth around like what I call building a multidimensional life. And it's like, so some of these frameworks can be useful in terms of like, but I think what you're talking about is like, however you want to spin it is up to you. Like if it's a helpful mental model for you to say, shit, I'm going to die. And like, for me, I'm 54. Realistically, I'm probably I'm halfway through my life. That's a sobering thought. So whatever model as long as that core truth is real.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm glad you brought up that counterpoint, because I think it adds a little more detail to what I was trying to get at, which is exactly what you said. Like there are certain frameworks that are beneficial. Like there are certain beliefs that are beneficial. I guess my whole point is like, if it works for you, great, use it. If it doesn't, I don't think you should be you should think yourself into this box and say, well, I have to use it because it worked for person X.
Right.
And I mean, it's the same thing with diets, right? Like there are like everyone's body is different. Like there's certain diets that work. There's certain exercise regimens that work better for you. Like become a lab rat, like go through different diets, go through different exercises, go through different mental models, like figure out. And this is my whole thing. And something I've been doing recently is like view yourself as a lab rat, like truly view yourself as a lab rat. Like be like, all right,
Yeah.
one night I'm going to go and I'm going to get 4 hours of sleep, and let me see how I feel in the morning.
Yeah.
Next night I'm going to get 10. Let me see how I feel. Today I'm going to do gluten-free. Does that work? Tomorrow I'm going to do carb-free. Does that work? High protein, whatever. I'm going to try building a business. Maybe I like that better than this 9-to-5 gig. Like,
right.
I just think we get siloed off. I guess the bigger idea is we get siloed off into these habits and these routines, and it's very difficult to get out of them.
Yeah. And I think I would add to that, like, dig down to the core truth behind everything. For some reason, while you were talking, what came to mind was a friend of mine the other day shows up at my house, and he has this like device. I think it was called a brick or something, that basically it shuts off his phone or blocks apps during certain periods of the day.
I think I've seen that.
And honestly, It kind of triggered me, because that is an attempt to address a symptom. And I told my buddy, I was like, hey, how about instead of spending $100 for a device that shuts off your phone, you actually just do the harder thing, which is teach yourself discipline. Because that discipline will help in all areas of life, not just with your phone. And so I think that's like you see a lot of this online, like on Twitter and stuff. People have all these frameworks and these hacks. And a lot of times I look at them and I go, well, actually, like, be better off actually just going to the core truth, like the root of the thing, and fixing that.
Do you think that, and this is generalizing, obviously, a large population, but do you think we live an over optimized life? Like, do you think that there's too much optimization that's going on? Like, your bedroom needs to be at this temperature to
Oh,
get, 8 hours of sleep, and all these, like, you need to be eating these types of food and you need to do this technique for time management. Like, just
yeah.
opinions on over optimization.
The greatest example of that, and this is another one I can go on a rant on, is like the whole quantified self movement around like tracking everything. Like I track 800 biomarkers in my blood. I wear a Whoop watch to track my sleep. I've got an 8 sleep bed. The irony of that, it's so funny because a lot of those quantified self guys who have all these gadgets, they don't do the thing. Like we lose sight of the fact that the most important thing is to actually do the thing. So, like a great example would be if I want to get fit, and let's say I like running. You'll have guys that have watches, they track their sleep, they have these apps that they use, but that can actually get in the way of just go out and fucking run. Like, just go do the thing. And so I'm very counter to that whole movement. I track almost nothing. I don't wear watches, jewelry, anything. I just focus on doing the thing.
To add to the irony piece of all that, and this is, I mean, I'm sure people will resonate with this. I've discovered that the more that I track my biomarkers and, wear the Apple Watch and track my runs or do whatever, like, the more stressed out I get about my health. And then
Totally.
that in turn diminishes my health because now I'm stressed out and I'm thinking about, like, well, this specific biomarker was, a tenth of a percentage off of whatever. That's just me. But again, it goes back to, like, knowing thyself, right? Like,
Yeah.
figure out what works for you. Some people love to track those things. Great. No judgment. For me, I would rather not, because I know the type
Yeah.
of person I am and I'm going to dive into
Well,
the weeds of it.
just to throw in a hot take, though, I will throw in a little judgment on that because there is absolute
Okay.
truth. And from what I've observed, like that tracking does lead you in a sort of a toxic direction. The sleep thing is a great example. I've seen so many people on X who said, I used to track my sleep score and do all these things to optimize, and it was stressing me out. I threw away all that stuff and I'm sleeping fine. Because the basics, like universal truth is universal truth. The basics are the basics. And for sleep, there's like 5 things you can do that will sort of guarantee you're going to sleep well. You don't need to track it, right? And so I actually do judge that a little bit because I do think it's misguided. And it's not. I don't believe that it's in all cases. It's like whatever works for you. I think there is a things that are productive and things that aren't productive. That's my
Yeah.
hot take.
No, listen, I'm here for the hot takes.
Yeah.
Kevin, I want to read you this essay that you've probably have seen and have heard. I first discovered it on Chris Williamson's podcast, Modern Wisdom. We were talking about doing the thing, and it reminded me of this essay. So I wanted to share this with you and with the audience real quick. The essay says, preparing to do the thing isn't doing the thing. Scheduling time to do the thing isn't doing the thing. Making a to-do list for the thing isn't doing the thing. Telling people you're going to do the thing isn't doing the thing. Messaging friends who may or may not be doing the thing is not doing the thing. Writing a banger tweet about how you're going to do the thing isn't doing the thing. Hating on yourself for not doing the thing isn't doing the thing. Hating on other people who have done the thing isn't doing the thing. Hating on the obstacles in the way of doing the thing is not doing the thing. Fantasizing about all the adoration you'll receive once you do the thing isn't doing the thing. Reading about how to do the thing isn't doing the thing. Reading about how other people did the thing isn't doing the thing. Reading this essay isn't doing the thing. The only thing that is doing the thing is doing the thing.
Dude, amen. I can go on a rant about that also because I see so many people who are always planning and preparing. They're listening to podcasts, they're reading books, they're writing plans, they're picking people's brains over coffee, but they never actually take that first step. And I had a pretty controversial tweet a while back where some guy had posted, he posted a picture of the 50 books that he read in this year. And I reposted it and said he would have been much better off. The average book takes about 10 hours to read. So I said he would have been much better off taking those 500 hours and actually doing something, right? Because doing the thing supersedes everything else.
Well, and it's the fastest rate of learning. Like
100%.
I could read about podcasting all day long, but guess what? Doing the podcast has taught me so much more about podcasting than either reading a book about podcasting or listening to other podcasters talk about it. Like listen, man, at the end of the day, do the damn thing. That is your one task.
If you know the My First Million podcast, Sean from that podcast, he has a really banger tweet on that where he says, you should dive in first, and then that tells you exactly what you need to go learn, right? So don't start with the learning because you don't know what you need to learn. Dive in. When you reach a block, go learn, then come back and dive in again.
That's so well said, and it's so true. Kevin, I want to be respectful of your time here, so I got a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap up and let you go. I heard this question the other day, and I thought it was super interesting. The question is simple: are you being driven or dragged? And let me define these terms. So, when I say "are you being driven," I mean, are you chasing something, right? Like, are you motivated either intrinsically or extrinsically by some goal or some motivating factor? Dragged is more so referring to, are you running away from something? Are you running away from poverty? Are you running away from a certain lifestyle? I wanted to get your take. What do you think you are? Are you being driven or dragged?
I think for a lot of my life, I was being dragged. I didn't mention this earlier, but I came from a fairly rough childhood. Didn't have a great relationship with my family, and some family members spent significant time in prison and so on. I won't get into all the gory details, but a lot of my life was just being driven by fear. So being kind of dragged forward by what I thought I was supposed to do, society's definition of success. Now it's very much the opposite. I mean, I'm a very intrinsically driven person, and I'm driven by creating and experiencing. Like, I get a lot of fulfillment out of creating things from nothing. I like to start with a blank canvas, and also by experiencing the amazing things this world has to offer. That's what drives me. And so I am driving is what I would say. Like, I'm not even being driven. I'm driving at this point in my life, which feels really good.
What helped you make that switch from being dragged to driven?
It all kind of is going to come back to this same thing we've talked about the entire episode, which is, understanding what the goal is, right? Because I think if the goal is not true to yourself, then you're being dragged. Like, you're being dragged by society. If you're pursuing a goal that's true to who you are, then you're driving. Like, you now know exactly where you're headed, and you're aligning your behaviors and your actions with that. So again, I think it all has to do with defining that destination.
How much did other people's opinions of you matter, and how did that change through time? Maybe from when you were in your 20s to now.
Yeah, I mean, I think pretty typical. Very insecure when I was younger, cared a lot what other people thought, and now it's basically a 180. I think some of that comes with age. Like, I really don't care much about what others think. Some of that is having tried a bunch of things, and when you know what works and you feel very confident in the direction you're headed, you don't have to care as much about what others think. Like, I have control of my own destiny at this point, pretty much. That's a very liberating feeling. And again, not to keep beating a dead horse here, but it all comes back to like knowing that destination and having confidence in it. But yeah, when you're young, you don't have a lot of, some of it's like evidence. Like when you're young, you don't have a lot of evidence that you're right about anything or that you're capable of anything. And then you learn a few things and hopefully you figure out what you're good at and you define your end state very clearly. And now, at 54, the evidence is overwhelming that I'm right about a lot of things. And so that confidence makes me care less. And not only that I'm right about a lot of things, but also I've learned the secret that almost everything society tells us is wrong. And so, not only do I have confidence that I'm doing the right things, but I also feel very strongly that when I hear something that society tells me, I just assume it's 180 degrees wrong. And that served me very well.
What are a couple of examples of that, of something that society has told you that have ended up being completely wrong?
Well, I mean, the classics, I'll give you one sort of like broad one and one specific one. The classic one is like, chasing money and that will make you happy, right? That's the lie we're told. The more tangible one was like, I think COVID was one big example of that. Like pretty much everything we were told was not only off the mark, but 180 degrees wrong. And luckily, I'm the type of person who is, I don't take anything I hear at face value. I do my own research, make my own decisions. And I think it's, early on that was very controversial, but now like a lot of the so-called conspiracy theorists have been vindicated, right? And, we know now that a lot of the things we were being told by our own authorities were not just wrong. They were 180 degrees wrong, or worse, they were being told to us when they knew they were intentionally wrong. And I'm not trying to turn this into a political thing, but I think everybody knows what we're talking about here. It's like there was a lot of intentional misinformation, and the impact was disastrous. Trillions of dollars, life and death type things.
Yeah. Who would have thought having a healthy lifestyle, going outside, getting some sun, getting some exercise, eating whole foods, it's don't have to overcomplicate it.
Well, and again, one thing I'd say to people listening is like, go to the source. One thing I did using COVID as an example, not to open a can of worms here, but early on when the vaccines were being developed, I went to the source. I actually read the studies, which I bet almost nobody has done. And if you read the studies, it's kind of crazy how they're just not compelling at all in favor of the vaccines. Even the pharmaceutical companies' own studies were like basically said these don't work, but they framed it otherwise. And so, that's a whole can of worms, but, and I'm not, I'm just saying in general in life, go to the source. Like, don't take somebody's word for something. Like, go to the source, look at the evidence yourself.
Yeah. Well, I like the, I think that kind of aligns with what you were saying earlier about, your friend who had the brick device, that would turn off his phone or notifications. It's like, well, I don't think you're really hitting at the root cause of the problem, which is the fact that you can't stay away from your phone and you have no discipline. Like that, that is the issue. And listen, I mean, whether it's COVID, whether it's, your attention span or your lack of discipline, like I just like the framework of go to the source of truth, like go to the root cause, like go to, step one, like, all right, I can't get in shape.
Yeah.
Option A, I take Ozempic, right, which has untold, impacts and Lord knows what it does to your body. Or option B is I try to confront what the source of my problems are, which is the fact that I am not disciplined enough to go to the gym and to eat healthy. And I'll tell you what, option B is a lot more painful than option A, because option B forces you to look yourself in the mirror and say, I am not good enough. I am not disciplined enough. Like I am failing at this one aspect in my life. And I think that's why a lot of people avoid it.
Well, and option B, though, if you do the hard work, benefits every area of life because everything comes down to discipline and choices. It's like the funny thing about
Yeah.
the brick thing on the phone is like, are you also going to get a brick for the ice cream in your fridge? Are you going to get a
Right.
brick for for porn? Like it probably exists.
R-
Like you can't band-aid everything in your life.
Yeah. No, that's Sean Purry had another great tweet on this. Speaking of Ozempic, he had said, I don't not digging into like the health implications of Ozempic. I don't want to take Ozempic just for the fact that I do not want to take the easy way out. Like
Right.
I want to be the type of person who like I can prove to myself like, hey, you did the hard work. You went through the trials and
Right.
tribulations. Like you did not take the easy way out. Like you forced yourself to work out and to eat healthy and to do the hard things. So I thought that was great because it's like, yeah, you can take the Ozempic and do nothing and sit on the couch and, lose 30 pounds, or you can do the hard stuff. So I like that framework too. Kevin, as we wrap up, tell us about the business you just launched. What is it? What are your goals with it, and where can we find out
Yeah.
more about it?
So the quick plug for the business is it's a men's health business. It's called Bolt Health. You can read more at bolt.health. But it was born out of my own experience. There's a low testosterone epidemic going on in this country, and I could spend an hour talking about all the reasons for it. But the data is very clear that testosterone levels for men of all ages have dropped off somewhere around 50% over the last few decades. And so even young men today are suffering from the health effects of low testosterone. I saw that happen in my 40s. I've tracked my blood for years, watched my level drop, did everything I could. To your point earlier with Ozempic, did everything in my power for a decade to try to fix it naturally. Ultimately, you have a choice. You either just live with the pretty devastating health effects of low T or do something about it. I did something about it, got on what's called testosterone replacement therapy or TRT. That caused me to go deep down a rabbit hole and realize that basically that entire industry is screwed up. The protocols are outdated. The medications got toxic ingredients in it. And so I built the testosterone service that I wanted as a patient. It's called Bolt. We pioneered the idea of microdosing. It's incredibly effective. It changes lives. It changed my life. It changes hundreds of guys' lives. It's a really fun business for that reason because we're selling a great product. Add to that, lots of research has come out in the past few years that dispels all the long-standing and very incorrect myths that have existed around like dependency on it and fertility and cardiovascular risk. Overwhelmingly, the evidence all shows, and this is the main thing that anybody listening to this needs to understand if you're a man about testosterone, is untreated low T has severe health effects, and the data is clear that men with low T die sooner. So if you don't correct it, you will die sooner. You will be less healthy. You'll be miserable from symptoms. And so all I say to men is if you think you might be a candidate, you're starting to notice some of the symptoms, you can Google it, get tested. And we happen to, I believe Bolt is the best testosterone. We're not the cheapest, but we are the best testosterone service out there. We're really more of a longevity service because we do a lot more than just testosterone. We always start with the natural methods first, and it's turned into a great little business. Turns out it's an untapped market. There's a lot of demand out there, and so we're having a blast building it.
What are some of like the early symptoms? Like what if people are if men are experiencing some of these things? Like what are some of those symptoms that would probably signal that they should go and get tested?
Sure, yeah. Testosterone is so foundational to metabolic health for men that the symptoms are wide ranging, but some of the common ones are like, I'm just fatigued. I'm losing muscle mass. I'm having bad workouts. I'm having foggy thinking, anxiety, depression, low libido, erectile dysfunction, decreased immune function. And but the wonderful thing is that when you correct your T level, all those things not only disappear, but they become, you feel better than ever. Like I'm 54. I feel as good as I did in my 20s. I'm still climbing at an elite level. And so it's sad because there's a lot of stigma and fear around testosterone, but it is life changing. And again, it's a foundational part of any longevity plan. if you want to continue performing and feeling great well into your 50s and 60s, then you will end up supplementing testosterone at some point.
Love it. Again, that is bolt.health. We'll put the link in the show notes of this podcast. And then the link to Kevin's X/Twitter account will also be in the show notes. And the link to his website is on there as well.
Yeah. And
Kevin,
one more thing.
Go ahead.
I would just say I do something that very few founders do. And sometimes I pay the price for this is I actually welcome people to just reach out to me directly. I'm incredibly responsive. Send an email to kevin@bolt.health if you have a question about anything I said, but specifically about Bolt or about testosterone. And I've studied this stuff for a long, long time. I've got my partner is a medical MD who's been in men's health for 30 years. So I'm happy to answer any questions at kevin@bolt.health.
Fantastic. We'll put that in the show notes as well. Kevin, you have blessed us with an hour and a half of your time. This has been an absolutely incredible interview. Certainly has not felt like an hour and a half. It's funny, like anytime I do one of these interviews, I gauge how well they go by how quickly I think time has gone by. And this one, I mean, this interview has just flown by. I do have to ask you one more question, though. And it's a question that I ask all my guests. If you could have a 30-minute conversation with any entrepreneur or athlete from history, who would it be and why?
Anybody from history? I want to give a thoughtful answer because there's some obvious choices. You know, this is a somewhat obvious choice, but it is someone who's passed away. I'd probably say Steve Jobs, because in many ways, you know, I would never represent myself to be nearly as talented as Steve Jobs, but I think I have a similar approach to work and a similar skill set on a much smaller, less pronounced basis, a similar skill set. I think the same way as he does, and so that would probably be my choice. Just it's the first one that comes to mind anyway.
Love it. Kevin, before we sign off, where can people find you and more of your work?
Yeah, for better or for worse, I've gone all in on Twitter, or it's now called X. I don't really post anywhere else, but you can find me on Twitter. My handle is Camp4. That's CAMP and the number 4. That's a climbing reference that some of you may get to the Climbers Campground in Yosemite National Park. Chose that as my handle way back in 2007 when I signed on to Twitter. So yeah, please give me a follow there and reach out via DMs.
Fantastic. Again, all of Kevin's links will be in the show notes. Be sure to check him out, to check out his company. If you are a man and you have any symptoms of low testosterone, certainly hit up Kevin, and I know you'll be in good hands. Kevin, thanks again for coming on. This was a blast.
Awesome, dude. This was fun.
All right. We'll stay in touch. Until next time.